I didn't want to see it, but then I did see it. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, can you? And now it's in my head. And after many days of waking up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, being tormented by this horrible blue-looking goblin smurf thing, he's there all the time, upsetting my nocturnal rest. And after a number of days, I thought, I need to come on my channel and talk about this, but I'm aware I'm perpetuating the same thing, aren't I? Now I'm sticking this image into your eyes and you'll unsee it. It's like a toxic virus. It's like a nasty thing getting into my brain and taking it over. I've got to talk about it. It's therapy. I think we all need to talk about it. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the Paris Olympics opening ceremony, and primarily this image which is behind me now. Now, this, if you look at it, is not the usual thing that we would expect to see in an Olympic ceremony. We would expect to see lots of people marching up and down and a sort of celebration of the country's culture from which, you know, this games is being held. I didn't say that very well. In which these games are being held. Back in 2012, you know, Great Britain hosted the Olympics, and we did an excellent opening ceremony, I thought, with lots of humour and subtlety, you know, Paddington Bear and, you know, all the brilliant rock music we've had, William Shakespeare, I mean, maybe even James Bond turning up to, you know, to go and meet the Queen. It was all very nice, cups of tea and bowler hats and subtlety and a gentle celebration of things done in a sort of calm and subtle manner, which is what I think England culturally represents. Now, the French, I don't think they've ever got into subtlety. We seem to think the French has sort of been a sort of stylish country and being the home of this sort of eruditeness. But I think that's the Italians, isn't it? Because the French seem to crack a nut with a sledgehammer. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Andy's been a bit old-fashioned here, and he's talking about the French in a way we shouldn't do. You know, he's all been a bit like, oh, I don't like the French, you know. And of course, I'm English, you know, and we have a history of not liking the French since 1066. But you've got to remember, we are all part French. You know, at one point, you know, the French owned all of this, and they came in, and they were pretty rough to us lot, I'll tell you that now. You know, so there's always been a love-hate relationship with the French. When I was a young man at school, we were taught to speak French, but not only were we taught to speak French, I can't even speak English today, even though we were taught to, even though they tried to teach us to speak French, they also taught us about the culture. And it was all bicycles and stripy shirts and berets and strings of onions, you know, and getting your long baguette from the local boulangerie. And there's you've got my two French words used, so I'm over with that. So, you know, so there's a love-hate relationship with the French. And so I didn't see this ceremony. I know no reasonable person would watch this ceremony if you think about it. But I heard about it, you know, the next day I'll get onto Facebook, and of course everybody is posting this scene from the opening ceremony. And, you know, again, everything has to be used to create this sort of political camp. So the way this pans out, and pan is a very interesting word to use in relation to this, because what I'm going to be doing on this is I'm going to be analysing this from a sort of aesthetic point of view on this video. And I am going to try and get into the deep symbolism that is in all art, that cannot help but be in the arts, right? But anyway, before we get to that, let's just set the scene, as I am trying to do now. So if you are over on the right, then you don't like this. It's an affront to Christianity. It's base. It's offensive. It's bad taste. There's all that thing. If you're more over to the left, then you think it's the best thing that's ever been done, and it's wonderful, and it's as the organisers said, it is a celebration of inclusivity. And I'm going to start with that because that's the official line here. This here behind me is a celebration of inclusivity. Now, when we look at the political landscape, and of course the political landscape, I believe, is encased within our ethical and moral landscape. And our ethical and moral landscape, I believe, and this is a contentious thing, is encased within our aesthetic understanding of the universe. So all these things are bound up within art. The Olympic Games is a celebration of merit. It's a celebration of doesn't matter who you are. This is a set of games which celebrate physical prowess, and the winners get there because of the meritocracy which is celebrated within the Olympic Games. It is also a celebration of bringing people together to compete against each other, but in a friendly place. Politics always gets in the way of this, and this opening ceremony has the feeling always of almost like a Greek or Roman parade. The fact that the French decided to do this on the River Seine has even more connotations of that. We get the feeling of sort of Cleopatra arriving by boat in Rome or whatever. It's that type of imagery that they've used, and that's all very powerful. The political landscape at the moment, you could see that there is a celebration of liberty and freedom in one way on the right and in another way on the left. So the right wants there to be, to some extent, freedom of speech that the individual's championed. On the left, the idea is a lot more about sort of communitarian approach, and that people should be allowed to do what they do and want to be who they are based upon the disenfranchised identity group to which they belong. So there's that thing going on in all of this. And so when we start with the idea of inclusivity here, what we are aware of is that they are talking about certain specific groups, and these are groups which are seen as being disenfranchised identity groups. So this assumes that there is a sort of ladder of identity that we are on, and then on that is a whole ladder of different identity groups, and you are a person and you are slotted into that identity group, and by being slotted into that tells you how much privilege you've got. You're either up here and it's down here. And one of the bizarre things with this identity group is that class and wealth aren't really in this. They're sort of in it, but there is a sort of platonic essential privilege which is within these identity groups. So even if you are a billionaire with all the privileges that a billionaire has, if you're in one of these identity groups, you still have like a parcel, a compartment of underprivilege which is not eroded by the wealth. It's always there, like an actual thing. And so people are at the bottom of this, in the bottom, they I did wish I hadn't said that phrase now. Those who are in the bottom, I put myself off. Come on, Andy, this is serious stuff. Those who are at the bottom of the ladder of hierarchy are the disenfranchised groups that need to be welcomed with open arms. And that's what inclusivity really means, So there were no Nazis in this parade. We're not going to include them, There was no MAGA people. There was no nobody on the right's included in this. It's not those groups. We're not going to have those marching up and down. We are inclusive to those at the bottom of the ladder. Now, of those groups, I find that a lot of them are very serious. I think ethnic minorities can be a bit serious, can't they? And I find that the trans lot can be a little bit serious, but the gays and the drag queens, they are the most fun of the disenfranchised group. So in a way, I'm quite happy that that's what's been celebrated in terms of this one, because there's a lot of humour here. There's a lot of playfulness. There is a lot of self-deprecation and poking fun. It's a very sort of court gestury thing. And in a way, that's quite a positive thing in what is a publicly funded piece of art. This is a grand piece of art that's been paid for by the powers that be. And that's the problem I have with this, is that I am aware that when we look at public art, what we are seeing is not the countercultural edginess of art that's really going to truly upset. This is the position of the powers that be. So what we have here is this is what is being championed by the establishment in France and the greater influences upon France. So why is this seen upsetting people? What are the counter arguments? I woke up the next day, I made a post about this, and I made one comment, really. I made one comment on this, and I thought, and it was a bit like this. I said, we live in a Western democracy, and we tend to put it down, but we shouldn't put it down, because it's great, because we can poke fun of it, like I just said, that, we're in a position of living in relative comfort. People aren't persecuted in Western liberal democracies. And the reason I think is because it's built upon, to some extent, Enlightenment liberal values, which come from sort of science and philosophy, and fundamentally from the Renaissance and the arts that happened in Western culture. But also it's based upon Judeo-Christian values. And I put the quote up of that Jesus says of those without sin, should cast the first stone, which was a reference from me to the same scene playing out in the Quran, where an adulterer, a sexually licentious person is brought to Muhammad, and they said, shall we stone this person to death? And of course Muhammad said yes, and they are stoned to death. But we live in the Western liberal democracy, and within these sort of Judeo-Christian, post-Enlightenment values, you can poke fun at Christianity and the Catholic Church and Christendom in this way. You can do that. No one's going to send you to prison. No one's going to try and kill you. All right? And so this is a soft target. This is the easy one to do. This is not edgy. This is conservative. The point I'm making, I've got no problem with this, but this is the art. Here, this is the art and values of our establishment in the West. And so we can put this under the microscope now and see what the West represents. And it's not going to actually be edgy and do the same thing to another religion that we won't mention, whose reaction would be quite different. And that actually might show up the actual stark cultural viewpoints and how they differ across the globe. And we'll show you where the pressure points are in terms of conflict. And for me, art should never ever be creating conflict. It should be trying to bring people together, as the Olympic Games are, and as this is, I think, is trying to say, look, we include all people. But there's a problem here, and the reason is because within identity politics, the theories that bound that and are contained within that are not Western liberal democratic values. They're values that come from another strand, which is very European, and you're going to see this more in France and in Europe. France is the home of continental philosophy. It's the home of people like Foucault and Derrida, and the sort of postmodernists. Right next to it, we have Germany and the Frankfurt School and the critical theorists. And these are applications of Marxism. Now, I'm not a big fan of Marxism, as you actually know. Will know if you watch the channel quite a bit. And I think, the reason I'm not is because it's at fault. And the socialists realised it was at fault by the end of the 19th century. And so they started to adapt it in all sorts of different ways. And it was adapted in all sorts of different ways. And there's all sorts of different strands. We see appearing in Leninism and Stalinism. We see appearing in China under Mao Zedong. We see it in Cambodia. We see it in Cuba. We see it in North Korea. And in the West, it comes through this line that comes through critical theory, through postmodernism, and then into identity politics. So what it does is it inherits the idea of these absolute essentialist spirits or groups. In Hegel, there is the great spirit, which is where all these ideas come from. And then in Marx, you have, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and the grand struggle and all these types of things. And now that is embodied in these idea of these essentialist groups. And these essentialist groups, just by the fact that they are underprivileged, have a moral standpoint which elevates them above the privileged. All right. Those sort of values are sort of inherent in fascism and Nazism as well. So I see these certain aspects. I haven't gone into that in great detail here, and I'm sure that will make people very angry because Marx still has a lot of apologists. There's a lot of people who are anti-capitalist, mainly people who live and benefit from living in a capitalist country, which we all do. But they're very keen to criticise it, and so they should, because that is the nature of our society in Western liberal democracies, is that you can criticise it and no one's going to chop your head off for doing so. And so what we have here, when we look at this, that those values that are being celebrated, I want to champion, all right? But also those ideas that come through identity politics, which are at odds, I think, with Western democratic values, I can see it as embodied here. And the most frightening thing is, I've got no problem with artists doing that. I'm all for artistic freedom of speech, except with this, we know the powers that be are championing those values. And so you start to look around and go, which billionaire is telling them to champion these values? Now that's a very left-wing attitude to have. Which billionaire, which set of billionaires want this to happen? Which one wants us to believe identity, comes from ourselves? Which group wants us, to think that, we can be who we want to be? Surely people who are pushing lots of money into the internet, because the internet, you can be who you want to be. And in the future, maybe that's how we will be. When you can't go outside because of global pandemics and because of, there's no more fuel and we've had to reach net zero and there's no jobs because AI do it. We'll if we're here at all, if the powers that be allow us to be here, they need us to be there. So how do we earn our money? How do we survive? And the only way that could be is to, rather than get paid for doing a job, you get paid for being a good person. That your activity is monitored online and you could get benefits, from being a good moral person, which of course suggests an absolute moral position. And those on the left seem to have found the absolute moral position, haven't they? Which I'm quite aware of, to the pushback I had against my criticism of this here. Now, my criticism of this here was the fact that this, as I've said, I think is the position of the powers of B. Right, that they're trying to control things, and there's a negotiation going on. Now, what we have here is interesting, and by the end of this video, I want to get to some of what I think are the deep aesthetic ideas that have gone through all human history and get embodied into art, whether we like it or not. I don't think the organisers of this had any awareness of what I'm about to talk about, but it is still there because art does not act or it does not function in the way the postmodernists said. That's another fault, right? The art is not just entirely culturally constructed, and that all meaning is culturally constructed. It deals with things that are much deeper than that, and those things resonate with us as human beings that go back to a time before communism and capitalism and the internet and pot noodles and, and Trump and Kamala Harris, way before any of that. There are things that are within us that are wired in there, almost like biological. They are essential, and it chimes with that. Okay, so what we have here looks, when you look at that, to be a depiction of the Last Supper as painted by Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, we have a central figure with a halo. This lady here. Well, I use the word lady, but so if you can just bear, I'm just going to use that for now. So that lady there, she's like the central figure, and she's surrounded by what looks like lots of gay people and drag queens. They're all there. I don't think we've got any real proper trans people, who I actually have a lot of empathy for, because I think they're a political football. I must say that at this point. Now, these are drag queens, and it's all very opulent, and they're very extrovert, right? And she's in, and behind there is the columns. Now, if you look at the Last Supper, you have the columns. Now, yes, there isn't 13 people around that table. There is actually 18 people, and they're sitting down to have the Last Supper. Now, in the Last Supper, Jesus, who is about to be crucified, asks his disciple to eat of the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. That is actually esoterically a reference to certain initiation cults that did actually happen back in the ancient times. And there is a thought that human beings actually accelerated. What is the reason for us suddenly becoming what we are, after, millennia of just being hunter-gatherers? What's the trigger? Could it be that we did become cannibals? Was it that eating human brains actually accelerates you? I don't know. Who knows? This is a very powerful thing. Now, I think what Jesus Christ is doing when he does that, when he says this is the body of Christ, is this represents Jesus Christ on earth. And so what we're pointing at is you've got, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, the Holy Trinity, right? Which I often call the law of three. In fact, I have a band called the law of three. And the law of three is really apparent in here. And that is what the Last Supper is referencing. Now, one of the things that Leonardo da Vinci is very clever at is that in the composition of his work, he references some of the Bacchanalian art. Now, Bacchus was the Roman god that represents Dionysius, but he also represents a few other, it's like an amalgam of different people in Roman times. I'm going to get to that in a minute, because this is such a complex thing. They are dealing with tropes that are so deeply enmeshed in our culture here. Around about the time of the Renaissance, they had a sort of style of painting which was the depiction of the Bacchanalian orgy. The Bacchanalian orgy was originally a Roman celebration. It was a secret sort of celebration. It wasn't government approved, if you want it like that. And it was a celebration of drunkenness and sexual licentiousness. Okay? With Bacchus, we get the sort of amalgamation of Dionysius, which is a completely different figure in Greek cultural history, and Pan. And Pan's a satire. So this is a guy walking around, with the old, the big goat legs, and he is very sexually licentious. There's lots of sculptures of him being friendly, let's say, with goats, and he in most depictions of Pan or a satire, which all links together, he is permanently, how can I put this? He's permanently ready all the time. He's ready and willing, to quote David Coverdale, all the time, visually. Now, this is referenced in this little picture here, believe it or not. And we'll So, instead of Jesus sitting down to have a Last Supper of the blood of Christ representing the Holy Trinity, this lot are sitting down to eat this figure here. Now, this figure here has almost, I think it's gone into my perception because it is so powerfully iconic. This bloke is it Dionysius? Is it Bacchus? Is it Pan? Right? Is it the ghost of Christmas past? Or is it Vishnu? Now, Vishnu is the Hindu god that of the universe. It's the embodiment of the law of three again, because Vishnu is part of the Hindu trinity along with Brahma and Shiva. And Vishnu embodies the trinity within Hinduism, which could be equated very close to sort of Gurdjieffian dialectic of sort of confirming and denying and consolidating, which relates then to the Greek dialectic and then relates to Hegel and then comes through into Marx, into the material dialectic. Vishnu actually is an embodiment of that. So we've got that embodied in this character here, over and over. So they are also eating of the law of three, of the great dialectic, all right? But it's a different dialectic. It's a dialectic which is pointing to all aspects of the dialectic. It references the sort of Judeo-Christian dialectic. We've got the sort of esoteric dialectics that we see in Sufism, in Hinduism. We see the law of three embodied in this fellow here. And he's a troublemaker. He looks like, he's almost like the spirit of the forest as well. He's surrounded by all sorts of, not fruits, but flowers. And of course, flowers are the is the sort of embodiment of sexuality in the plant kingdom. And if you look at a painter like Georgia O'Keeffe, she used the flower to almost depict the feminine and the masculine together in quite physical description. So this is what we've got. This stuck right in the middle of an Olympic ceremony, and what this is saying is that the guiding structure of the universe is this acceptance of different sexualities and the licentious aspects of those celebrations. It's a celebration of that as much as anything else. So we're not celebrating the cold idea of just, homosexuals should be allowed to do what they want behind private doors. This is a very opulent going. Let's let it all hang out. Now, the troublesome things start to come in with this. Within all this celebration of sexualizationness, there's a child. And also, remember I said about letting it all hang out, and I'm hoping, my shoulder has been shielding you from something I am about to show you. I'm about to show you something a bit rude. So if you don't want to see something rude, close your eyes now. And if you want to see something rude and you've just pepped up, and I've managed to hold you a little bit longer, extracting a little bit more of money out of the advertising, then keep your eyes open. But if you've got your eyes shut, you don't want to see this, I will describe it so you will know it's there, and then I will move myself. So if I get out of the way here, move over a little bit. This man here, and I'm hoping you can't really see it, this man here, there, right where my finger's pointing, there is some sort of appendage which is visible to the whole world. Now, the child is somewhere around here. I think it's behind this one here. Or I think, looking at the photos, you can't see the child here. Maybe they removed the child, and I'm being a bit mean. So I'll give them the benefit. Maybe the child was removed when they introduced this appendage here. Now, I can't tell from, because the bizarre thing is there is no footage of this anywhere to be found. I've never seen this ceremony. I am going on the photographs I've seen. It's been all taken away. It's the most bizarre thing. We'll get to that in a while. I think what we have there is best described as a testicle. Yes, I just said it right. And the aforementioned testicle is now covered up. So if you are of a nervous disposition, you can now open your eyes and you can gaze back on this quite sensibly. So what on earth are the French taking the Last Supper and then inverting it to be a celebration of a licentiousness, displaying actual genitalia involving children and all sorts of, things that are really very unsavory, basically. Now, I've got to be honest, if I'm really objective, I believe in that artists should be able to express themselves, but I don't believe that in their expression should be able to be seen by children. I think that has to be protected. I think that's without the case. Now, on this opening ceremony, one thing I did see, there was a certain scene where there was I think it was 3 gay men went into a bedroom and they all started canoodling, and then they walked up to the door and shut us. We weren't allowed in to watch whatever was going to happen. So I don't so much see this as a celebration of different sexualities, different identities. I see it a lot more as a celebration of sexual licentiousness, which I don't think is really is right in a publicly funded ceremony opening up a games which is going to celebrate everybody coming together from all walks of life and celebrate the meritocracy of friendly competition. I can't see the relevance. I can't see why that would be celebrated. I don't know what it's in here for. And I think what really is the case is the fact that these ideas that we see, these aesthetic ideas, and this is, I think, is something that no one said and is so obviously true. They have become tired cliches. This is the sort of art that in the 1960s would be incredibly dangerous and worthy because of that. It would have been a display of what we are really dealing with when we decide to allow certain sexual activity to be legalized, for example. And of course, there is lots of sexual activity that is still not legal. And so the argument in the 1960s was very dangerous because the way people feel, I think obviously rightly, about, child sexual activity is how they felt about homosexuality in the 1960s. That was a hard thing to sell. And the artists fundamentally made the case. Art always makes the case. You can't make it rationally. You have to make people see the other side and feel what it's like to be on the other side. And so we see this sort of imagery play out. By the 1980s, if you're watching like films, say by like Peter Greenaway or Derek Jarman, this is now not mainstream, but it's in the culture. What we have now is, as the postmodernist era falls apart, these tropes have actually now become part of the establishment, and they're trotted out without thought. Certain people are hired, certain things are put in place, and people criticising it are seen in the same way as those who were criticising the criminality of homosexuality in the 1950s and the 1960s here in the UK, for example, how they were seen. Right, what has happened is those who sit there and go, I'm not too sure about this. My feeling, look at this, I go, this is conservative art. This is the establishment. This is safe. They are not poking the stick at something that's dangerous, but what they're doing is they are getting the cultural currency of appearing to do that, because once we got over the civil rights movement in the 1960s, we start to see that these people were right and we couldn't treat people like this. People who acted that way suddenly seemed saintly and they became championed. And before you knew it, all these people that were stuck in prison in the 1950s and 1960s, you go to university and your student union bars are named after these people, and they're celebrated wherever you go, rightly so. So there's cultural currency. And of course, the elites, everybody involved in this ceremony is part of the elite. They're not you or me. How many people get asked to be involved in an Olympic ceremony? Now, they do include the great unwashed, but those people are shuffled in and shuffled out. The people behind it, the people who are pulling the strings, are the people who have either through their own hard work or through birthright have ended up in a position where they are part of the sort of established narrative, and that's usually because they made someone a lot of money. And so they are going to want to act in this way because it gives them a whole bunch of brownie points. Right, they can be championed and patted on the back by the people, because everything about this serves the elites at the moment. Absolutely everything about it does, without a doubt. Anybody standing up against this, criticising this, which will be, believe it or not, and this is a hard thing for me to get across because I know I am talking to quite an educated group of people, but they're all quite middle-aged, they're quite old, so there will be people championing and stamping the table and go, Andy's right, he's actually talking the truth. No one actually says this, and there'll be other people going, hang on, Andy's criticising this. Is he a transphobe? Is he this? Is he that? And I hope I'm not. I actually am a huge fan of homosexual art, if that's a thing. I much rather treat artists as being, was W.H. Jordan, is that homosexual art? Oscar Wilde, is that homosexual art? Errol Garner, the jazz pianist, who I have just for now vaguely have an awareness he may be gay, he may not be. That can be backed up. But there's a bit, if I'm right, there's a bit of jazz knowledge there for you. Maybe that's the next video for me. If I've got in enough trouble, maybe I should be doing the top 10 greatest gay jazz musicians. Who'd be winning on that one? Hard to say, isn't it? There's some cracking musicians there. I have always found it very entertaining, anything that's camp. I'm British after all. We love the camp. We love all this. You know, there's a part of me that finds this when I look at that, especially the little blue Smurf character in the middle with the ginger beard. I can't help but find him very entertaining, but a little bit frightening, to be honest. So where are we with all this? Let's get on to the deep embodiment. Like I said, that there are things going on in this which I think go beyond culture. And the question that's really interesting is that with a little bit of analysis, we can see this sort of dialectical view of the world is apparent in this absolutely over and over. Now, the reason I think that is because art was created by human beings because it was a solace. It was a solace in the world that was troublesome. Our world is troublesome now. You know, all the geopolitical stuff that's going on, the wars, the anger between different political groups, you know, all this stuff. The world's troublesome. People haven't got enough money. You know, people are going in this country. They're going to food banks, and their families are breaking down. You know, the structures are changing. There doesn't seem to be anybody to represent you politically. They all seem to be of the ruling classes. And I often find when I get in arguments with people that are politically against me and it gets really bad, sometimes I'll send them a private message and say, look, what's going on? You know, and this happened with a friend of mine, and we started chatting, and we eventually realised that we just hate the whole lot of them. I think that's most people hate the whole lot of them, and there's no one there to really represent them. I think in America, you know, Trump is successful because there is actually people that have an affinity for Trump. I don't think we got that here in the UK. But art goes way past then. And before we had even invented like agriculture, you know, when we were living as a hunter-gatherers, you know, and maybe we would gather everybody together and our whole existence depended on whether we could get out and catch some great big, you know, beefy animal and drag them back, and that creates a sort of skill level. It creates this idea of forethought. It creates the idea of the heroic individual, but it also creates the idea of the group coming together. And there is literally millennia of us acting like that, and our existence depended on it. And what do you do when you want things to happen in the future? You put your hands together and pray, and you visualize and you embody. And in doing that, the fear that you have, the terror of the situation, can somebody be assuaged by somebody pulling out some flute that they fashioned, and they start to play music, or they draw things on the wall of their caves, and people look at it. And what that does is it brings two aspects together, right? What it does, it places you in the moment. That's what art often will do. It will place you in the moment, but with reference to this idea of something done well. In other words, perfectionism. You are aware of certain harmonic, you know, which is a musical term, harmonic aspects which are in line. And when those things are in line, it's as though these two things that are in opposition suddenly come together, and there is a feeling of the sublime in that, and there is a feeling of solace in that. And I think that can be seen as a dialectic between what we could see as being in the moment of just pure pleasure, of hedonism. Now, if you exist in this moment, then obviously you don't plan, you end up starving to death. You know, you end up, you know, living in wretched poverty, you know, covered in boils and lice, you know, with your children dying of neglect. Pretty much the life that Karl Marx gave himself, because he was so misdirected in his worldview. There's a contentious comment, people can argue about that, but there's a certain view which I do withhold, that Marx did live like that, and he has embodied that into Western culture at the moment, but that's another video. And then we have this idea of order. Now, in Greek mythology, this is represented by Apollo and Dionysius. Now, in a certain way, that guy is the Dionysian figure. What we have is a celebration of the hedonist aspect, right? The Apollonian is away. Now, the interesting thing is that the Greek games, there were 3 games, but the one we really derive our sort of modern Olympic Games was from the one that celebrated Apollo. And if you think the Olympic Games is really Apollonian, so there is a sense of balance of having this sort of very Dionysian revelry happening before the games begin. That I can see that. But what's far more interesting to me is that these tropes are there. These tropes are in this, and I don't think they're in there deliberately. So you have the Apollonian and the Dionysian, you have chaos, or you have hedonism, or you have licentiousness, or you have revelry, or you have the visceral feeling of art, you know, the thing that hits you in the stomach, you know, the drum beat in dance music, you know, the chaotic screaming guitar part. And then you have the Apollonian, which is represented by order or perfectionism, which is in the art is the idea of harmony and structure, and musicians, you know, walking on the tightrope of not hitting bum notes, of not going wrong. And those two things need to work together. And my fundamental criticism of this is the fact that cultures swing between these two. They swing between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. All right, and in the 1960s, everybody who had grown up in the 1940s and 1950s was the recipient of a sort of modernist view of the world, where everybody was a cog in the machine. Where you have factories, and then you had order, and you had like you went to work and there was a job, and that job was sitting on the conveyor belt doing all of this. When you listen to music, you would listen to like Frank Sinatra, and he would be in front of a band, and that band would have a boss who had written the arrangements, and the musicians would play in a predictable style. And if you were good, it's because you were in this ordered world. When rock and roll comes in, that generation look at rock and roll and go, my God, this is so, it's all over the place, you know. I mean, those Beatles, they haven't even cut their hair, and they're just singing and twanging their guitars. And you see in the 1960s a swing, like that's the Apollonian. You see a swing from the Apollonian to the Dionysian, and it's needed, right? And what's happened is that the Dionysian now has become the tired, predictable, dogmatic, ideological trope of the powers that be. And it is now threatening and crushing the values that we had of a sort of quiet, organized liberalism that came from the Enlightenment. It's something that we have a lot of nostalgia for now. And so this here is countering what needs to be happened, which is we need the Apollonian. So do we, Andy, do we? Yes, we do. If you want to achieve net zero, all you on the left, you're going to have to wind everything in. Simple as that. If you want to control sex trafficking, illegal immigration, if you want to control children being pulled into poverty, it will require a structure, it will require some sort of order, and there's loads to choose from. And I really don't want Western liberal democracies to go and choose from the ones on the left that are in identity politics or postmodernism. They are the tired ones. They have had their day. We need to move to something which I think is far more nature bound. We need to look at the order within nature. And I think that's why many people on the left and right are interested in the Green parties. Now, I'm a little bit opposed to this politically, because I think it's very easy for the ruling classes to say, yeah, let's go towards net zero, not caring that this was going to impinge on the poor extremely, especially in third world countries where that's the only way of accessing energy, and the access to energy is what makes our lives comfortable. So that's one of the objections I have to that, but also the fact that the Green parties, at least here in the UK, have also welcomed with open arms the more dangerous aspects of identity politics. And what do I mean by the dangerous aspects? Well, I'm going to finish with this. This is basically my position, and I hope people won't think that I'm right-wing or I'm a racist for saying this, but when you try and come up with a structure, and all these things are like championing different sort of societal structures, it's very easy to become utopian. You could say, we have the answers. You know, Karl Marx could say, I've got the answers, or Mussolini or Hitler could say, I've got the answers. Pol Pot could say, I've got the answers. This is what we need to do. It's going to make the world loads better if we could get everybody to do this. Shall we try and get everyone to do this? Yeah, all right then. So you try and get everyone to do it. So what happens? Some people turn around and they go, I don't want to do it. There could be all sorts of reasons. They could be little greedy pigs. They could be individuals. They could have an identity group which does not fit in to this new world order that the utopians are putting forth. And this has happened every single time any culture has tried to implement a utopian world order. And believe me, the utopian world order is actually really embedded in Christianity. Really embedded. You know, the utopian order of Christianity is accept Jesus Christ, and if you don't accept Jesus Christ, you will not be part of the club. We will all be reborn, we will live forever, but you lot won't. You will either not live forever, or you will be cast into the burning fires of hell. Any Christians say that that's not what Christianity is about, then if they say that, you're fine, aren't you? Because you can carry on not being a Christian because you're still going to get the same reward in the end, aren't you? Right? And so it cannot exist. And the same is true of Marxism, the same is true of the whole lot. You cannot have a utopian world order unless you are willing to do something about the people who don't agree. Now, what you will try and do is re-educate. I have had that shouted at me by people on the left. You need to be re-educated. I'm here to re-educate. I'm here to tell you what's what. Right? And they talk to me as though, and they say, do you know that this? And I go, yeah, I do, because I'm not an idiot. Right? And they think I'm an idiot. So straight away, they think they're not only in an elevated moral position, but they also think that they're in an elevated intelligence position. It all starts to get very odd, almost like they are championing a worldview which they are supposedly against. Why is that? Because there is a contradiction in identity politics. If you want to implement this stuff, and it's all really good stuff, I'm not saying it's not. Let's be inclusive. Let's not torture people and tell them they can't do this and can't do that. Let's do all that. But if you try and embody that, as soon as you do it, people are going to turn around and say, I don't like it. I don't want it. I don't agree. So you have to re-education. If they won't go through a re-education program, it's best then to then try and lock them up. Right? And if that doesn't work, when they're locked up, they're still not, conducive to going with the powers that be, then you kill them. Re-educate, lock up, kill. That is what concentration camps, that is the camps that the Myanmar Muslims are trapped in China at the moment. And any group that starts to move towards these things of trying to shut anybody down, you may go, well, no one's trying to put anybody in prison. But that's the first stage, is the re-education. Right? How do you re-educate? You get to the schools, you get to the universities. You work from within. That was the great achievement of Mao Zedong in China, was not to just try and force it on the people, then try and hold it there through some sort of autocratic Stasi or KGB, where everybody watched each other, the Big Brother thing. They indoctrinated a whole bunch of young people. And when Mao Zedong started to get into real trouble, he was able to use that army of young people to go storming in, having demonstrations, grabbing the powers that be. And in the end, they were carted off. And who was carted off? The middle-class educated elite, the very people here that are championing all these values. Believe me, you will be the first up against the wall when the Great Revolution comes. And this is something we need to all think about. And I believe that if we go back to the actual stuff that's inherent in this and in all art, and we look at the dialectic, we will see everything has to have its opposite, and there has to be a dialogue between those two that then meet in the middle. And what I'm asking for on this video, and I realise I'm not doing this to some extent, and I'm going to try and do it a lot more, is that we fundamentally need to say to each other, you have a different political opinion to me. My political opinion is not come from some utopian death cult that I have attributed myself to. Mine comes from my own individual experience. And I am championing that because I know it and I feel it. But I'm aware that you've had a different experience. and your experience is justified. And in the specific cultural climate in which we live, we need to sit down and talk in a way which allows our two different viewpoints to come together and create an effect in the world which is positive, which is an amalgamation that is correct for the specific cultural times in which we live. How do you do that? Well, I tell you how you do it. You do that by approaching that other person with love. It's in, Christianity, it's in Western liberal democracy. I've found if you're arguing with someone on the internet and if you just stop to say, look, I really appreciate the conversation, if you're their friend, say, I'm still your friend and I agree with it, or I would like to be your friend. I think if we were talking in real life, it would be a lot easier to try and find some constants, because you won't on the internet. The internet, I know, exists in a certain way. I'm very aware of that because I've got a YouTube, and I know that blue man is going to have some people push on it. And I hope that, anyone who's watched this video at the end has gone, well, Andy had quite a cosy, lovely, warm message, which was all the political opinions are great, but we need to live in a situation where we all get on and we all put our arms around each other and we go, what do you think? Oh, I don't agree with you. Well, what's the best thing to do? Well, we'll have a bit yours. Yeah, I can deal with you doing that. That's not so bad, as long as I can get this bit in. You've got to remember that everything in the Communist Manifesto, which is the only thing anyone's ever read that Karl Marx read, is already in our Western liberal democracies. We do have unions, we do tax people, we do redistribute, and we do need to redistribute and give it to the people that need it. Not this elite here. I'll tell you who we need to give it to: poor people. Now, I know this has been very political, but I really wanted to show on this video how politics exists within art, and how taking something like this, I hadn't planned this video, as you know. I have taken that and I have just started thinking about it and talking about it. And it is my impersonal interpretation. I believe there's objectivity in there, but there's also subjectivity. Because again, objectivity and subjectivity is perhaps the great dialectic on which all these are based. And art deals with those two things. This is a heavy video. Just by looking at that little blue fella there, we have been able to extrapolate a lot of meaning. And the reason is because I am discussing what's going on. Right? I have tried to point out what I think is really bad about this, and there's some stuff that's really bad, and tried to show that the really good stuff that's in here, and we need to move to that in our society. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a very philosophical one. It was a bit contentious. I hope that by the end, if you've got here and you do disagree with me, that we can have a conversation which isn't based upon us hating each other's guts and thinking that I'm some sort of MAGA racist, Trump voting, Nazi, and that you are some sort of Leninist and Stalinist just waiting to cart me off to a gulag somewhere. Although I'm sure that's the case, really. Come on. Be honest with yourself. You'd love to get me in that gulag, wouldn't you? In the jazz rock gulag. Well, jazz rock's a gulag in itself now, isn't it? You put yourself in there, don't you? So I'm going to go now, and I'm going to start working on my, the 10 greatest gay jazz musicians that have ever existed. And I've got to try and work out who they are. Because, of course, in the old days, they wouldn't have said, would they? Because they weren't allowed to be gay. How bloody rubbish was that? Thank God we've moved on from those times, eh? And we can have this bloke with his testicle out in front of a child. It's great stuff, isn't it? See you on the next video. Oh, yeah, before I go, if you did enjoy this, then like it. Because I'll tell you, there's a ton of videos on this thing here. There's nothing that was talked about bloody Vishnu and testicles and brought that in with the French, not fighting the Germans in the war. Oh, I never did mention that, did I? Look, I'm just getting myself into more trouble here. I'm a middle-aged Englishman. I'm part of the middle-aged Englishman identity group. Where was us? Where was us? You could have had a grumpy bunch of old men round that table, and when they opened it up, it could have been me half naked sat in there, surrounded by, accoutrements of the middle-class male, which would basically be Black and Tecker power tools, wouldn't it, and a Pink Floyd album. I'd be sat there in my blue pants and my ginger beard. Oh, why couldn't we have that visual image? You think this one's bad? It could have been far worse if they just got me to do the opening ceremony. When we come back to the Olympic Games, can you please get that there? I'm sure by that time my YouTube will be the biggest YouTube in the world, so I will have the power. And I'm going to do the next British Olympic Games. In fact, we're in the next country, I might go and approach them. And it will be a celebration of inclusivity of old middle-aged men, right? We all know that if they stopped having modern sports ceremonies, right? And we brought back all the old people, the best ones, you know. So Wimbledon, we don't want to see all these new people running around. We want to see bloody Bjorn Borg, and we want to see him fighting John McEnroe. Well, bring them back. I don't care if they're decrepit. I don't care if they can't get the ball over the thing. There's still the fire there. There's still the fight. You know, Dennis Taylor and Steve Davis, come on. We want to see it again. Let the old people celebrate it. Let's get all the old boxers hitting each other. Come on. Mike Tyson's getting out there, you know. Let's bring it all back. Let's have champions in some inclusivity for old people, especially old white men. We're really left out of this. Come on, get on this. We can have this ready for the next Olympic Games. So if you like that idea, like the video. If you want to see some more, subscribe. If you want to support me in doing this, the best way is to become a patron, and we can go and plan it in secret in the background, like the, you know, the sort of Bolsheviks ready to create the revolution, the grey revolution that's going to come. And but if you don't, and you are an affluent, privileged person, you can redistribute some of that affluence to someone who is not affluent, and that is me. So I'm not affluent, by putting some money into my PayPal tip jar. But really only do that if you enjoyed the video, if you did have a laugh and you learnt something and it was entertaining, and I ticked all those boxes, which I'm trying my best to do with what I've got, which is an old TV, an iPhone, and my light, so I don't look like a white pasty thing anymore. Oh, and my gold disc. That's not my gold disc, by the way. And my John Coltrane painting, and my turntable, and my little wagging good luck cat. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.